New York and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning. Laura Stiles. Rosenberg's on assignment with ESPN. Give it up for Mina Malik, running for district attorney for Queens. Give it up one time. Round of applause. Round of applause. Round of applause. All right, so look, let's get right to it. You are going up against somebody we just interviewed. Cabán.
Cabán, yes.
Are you guys colleagues? Do you guys know each other?
So I only met her on the campaign trail.
Got it.
And look, kudos to her. She's got the tenacity to run for the job. This is a big, big responsibility. It is the largest law firm in the county of Queens, 600 people with 300 attorneys, 300 unionized workers. And this is the top law enforcement official in a county of 2.4 million people, the most diverse county in the entire country, if not the world.
Currently, the lady who is the district attorney has held the seat for how long again?
So right now it's the acting district attorney, Jack Ryan.
Oh, Jack Ryan.
Right.
Got it. But there's another woman also running. That's not you and Cabán that's running. Am I understanding it right?
Two other women.
Right. And who are they?
Melinda Katz, borough president, and Betty Lugo.
Ludo. And why do you think you're the most qualified for the job?
Well, number one, my lived experience of growing up in Queens. I'm an immigrant, a woman of color. I've raised 2 black sons in Queens, so I have that experience of being a Queens resident and having conversations with my 2 sons about how to survive a police encounter when they're stopped on the street or whether they're driving the family car. The second reason is because I've been involved in criminal justice for over 20 years. I've been on the defense side. I started off at the D.C. Public Defender Service, and I've been on the prosecution side. I have worked alongside police officers, and I've also held them accountable for their misconduct. And I've been involved in the criminal justice reformer space now with Attorney General Carl Racine and as special counsel to Brooklyn DA Ken Thompson, and as the executive director and the head of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is the largest oversight police agency in the country, overseeing the NYPD.
So you've done a lot of work. We love Ken Thompson, R.I.P. Ken Thompson. He came up here when he was running for Brooklyn District Attorney. Do you, we've talked to Cabán, whose ideas are very, I guess, quote unquote, progressive. Do you guys disagree on anything to your knowledge?
I believe we disagree on decriminalizing the entire sex worker industry.
Okay.
And look, I prosecuted the first person under the 2007 sex trafficking law who started out as a pimp. And he was pimping out 2 16-year-old girls in Queens, then moved on to a 17-year-old girl. And, he had groomed them, right? He had bought them clothes, got their hair done, got their nails done. And when they fell into it with him because they were having problems at home, he started pimping them out and started keeping the money. And they realized they were making a lot of money by doing sex work. But when they tried to get out of the life and they tried to get away from him, that's when it turned violent, right? And we're talking about young women from Southeast Queens who were working the tracks, who were posted on Craigslist, for their sexual services. And he got violent with them at the end. And that's what I don't agree with, right?
So technically they're sex workers and he's sex workers because he's is that what you're saying? Like he would, in the scenario that Cabán is presenting of decriminalizing all of it, he doesn't become a criminal either.
So it protects him.
Right. Under her scenario, it protects pimps, johns, and to a certain extent, traffickers. So we can't have that, for our youth and our young women. And let me tell you, these women were so affected. They were so degraded. They were so exploited. One of the 16-year-old girls got pregnant by one of the men that she had to have sex with and ended up having the baby. And, I just don't see a world where we are decriminalizing sex work across the board, and it's appropriate for our communities, because where are these young people and these young women and young men going to come from? They're going to come from our communities. They're not coming from the affluent white communities. They're coming from our communities. And if you want to talk about decriminalization, then why don't you talk about legalization, right? But nobody wants to talk about legalization of the sex worker industry, because then it's government regulated. Then you have to deal with the public health issues, right, of getting tested for STDs and things like that. But so decriminalization, I don't agree with.
What about marijuana?
I think that we are moving towards the legalization of marijuana, and I definitely think that once that happens in this state, that any revenue that comes from the legalization of marijuana should go to the communities that were disproportionately affected and discriminated against when there were marijuana arrests and prosecutions, and people who have marijuana convictions now because of that.
In Queens, I think Queens is one of the boroughs that is still actively convicting on cases of marijuana. Am I understanding that right?
That's right, it is.
And
so
do you agree with that?
We need to move away from that. We need to move away from criminalizing poverty, people with mental health issues, people with substance use disorder. And the research has shown that marijuana arrests and prosecutions disproportionately affect our youth and our black and brown communities, despite the same rate of usage in the white communities as well as the black and brown communities.
And so if you're elected DA, is that going to be something, is that low-hanging fruit? Is that something that you could do right away since it's kind of already decriminalized in the city and it's kind of been, it feels like it's been left kind of borough to borough. Am I understanding it right?
That's right. In fact, back in 2014, when I was special counsel to Brooklyn DA Ken Thompson, I worked with him on a low-level marijuana possession decriminalization policy, where we decided, as the first DA's office in the country, that we were not going to prosecute low-level marijuana possession. We went to the mayor's office at the time, we went to the police commissioner at the time, we presented this new policy, and we got pushback from them. But at the end of the day, Ken Thompson and our office said, well, you know what, you can go ahead and make these arrests for marijuana, but we're not going to prosecute the cases. So your resources would better be spent elsewhere. And right now what's happening, what's being the disproportionate and discriminate effect that this is having is that you go into, the Bronx or you go into Queens or Manhattan or Brooklyn, and you're being treated differently for different crimes, right? So that's creating a disproportionate impact.
Right. And then also, speaking of marijuana, you have, I think, people still getting criminalized over the pens, the vapes, the whether it's the oil or the wax and these things. Can you impart some wisdom on why that is? And that's even in Brooklyn and Manhattan. So what's the insight there? Why is that being treated differently than smoking marijuana?
Well, smoking marijuana, I think, is a public health issue if you're smoking it out in public, right? Like, not everybody wants to smell it.
That's
right?
kind of like walking around and drinking. You can't walk around the streets drinking either.
Right, exactly. Except, you're not affecting somebody else's health by drinking. You're just affecting your own, right? But it's similar to fare evasion, right? Fare evasion, you're not getting arrested for that in Manhattan, but you're getting arrested for it in Queens.
Right.
So there's another disproportionate impact. So all of these low-level offenses that really have nothing to do with public safety need to be decriminalized because it disproportionately affects our youth and our black and brown communities. And it saddles them with a criminal conviction that affects them for the rest of their lives.
Of course.
And are these things that you could do right away? That you yourself will be able to get done right away?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, you want to take it where you can get buy-in from the staff and explain it because this is a big agency. Like I said, it's the largest law firm, right? It's an office of 600 people. So when you're trying to implement culture change, which I've already done at the Brooklyn DA's office with Ken and the CCRB and the Attorney General's office with Carl Racine, you have to make sure that you're doing it and sequencing the events.
Prosecuting police. Talk to me about, A, why is that so hard? And B, where you're at with, let's take an officer like Pantaleo in Staten Island who, with the killing of Eric Garner, right? And do you like how that's being handled? Is it being handled properly? Would the district attorney have any, if that were to take place in Queens, do you have any input on that?
Sure. So obviously I was the head of the Civilian Complaint Review Board, right? And that case came into my office when I was the head of it. That one, James Blake, Thabo Cephalosha, the Atlanta Hawks player, I firmly believe that there has to be strong police accountability. And we have to be doing it for our communities because that's the only way that the public is going to trust us as law enforcement, right? As law enforcement, as government agencies. So we have to take it very, very seriously. And what's happened in the past, you go back to the 80s and the 90s, right? You have cases like Pedro Baez, right? And you could just change the names almost. Instead of Pedro Baez, you could change it to Eric Garner today. So we need to have that accountability. The Eric Garner case was investigated and substantiated under my tenure. And I personally went down to the medical examiner's office and spoke with the medical examiner and went over that autopsy report for almost an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it's because of my leadership in that agency that that case is being tried today. The Staten Island DA's office failed to get an indictment in the case, and the U.S. Department of Justice is still investigating it 5 years later. This is why people don't have faith in the system, because you have to have the backbone and the strength to say, I'm going to stand up for what's right, and I'm going to do what's right for the people.
And do you believe Pantaleo should, right, I guess it's beyond being convicted with a crime now. Now it's just about him losing his job, right?
Right.
And him being convicted with a crime, who failed there? What was the failure there?
So the case was actually presented to the Staten Island DA's office, and the Staten Island DA presented it to a grand jury and did not get an indictment. So when the grand jury in Staten Island heard the case, they came back with what's called a no true bill, no indictment. Honestly, having looked at that autopsy report and having sat down with the medical examiner, I don't understand how a grand jury could come back with no indictment in that case.
So you think Pantaleo should have been found, or at least should have went to trial on some sort of crime?
Yes, I think it is a travesty of justice.
And should be unequivocally fired. Like, he shouldn't be able to work.
He should be terminated.
Why does this process take so long?
This process has taken so long because there were a number of issues that came up where agencies were not allowed to go forward with the case, right? So the Staten Island DA's office had their case going on. The U.S. Department of Justice had their investigation going on. So they had asked other agencies to stand down until their investigation was complete. But look, the U.S. Department of Justice still, I don't think, has come with a resolution to their case, right? And it's almost 5 years.
Is
So
that political?
they're currently still investigating.
That's my understanding, is that they're currently still investigating.
I like the quotation marks because it sounds like bullshit.
And it's going on 5 years, right? It doesn't take that long.
You call bullshit?
I call bullshit.
If I were to Google your name, what would I find that would, what don't people like about you?
I don't know. What's there not to like?
I don't know. I'm giving this is your opportunity to give us the, because I'm sure when we post this video, people are going to say, oh, she did this and she didn't do this right. And everybody's got a problem with somebody. So I want to hear from you.
Sure. I think that when you are a woman of color and you are a strong woman of color and a well-qualified woman of color, and you're trying to get a seat at the table in the room where it happens and where important decisions are made, you are going to come up against some strong forces that are going to try and hold you back. And when you're trying to implement culture change in an agency that has been operating in a way for so long where people have either not done their jobs, are not interested in reform, are not interested in making positive changes, you are going to get pushback, especially as a woman, and especially as a woman of color.
And so you think if we were to look up anything, most people would just be like, she's hard to work with, or have you made some mistakes?
I think that people would say that, they would couch it as hard to work with. But again, when you're trying to implement transformational change in an agency, especially where people have been working there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, you're going to get pushback.
Look, I'm hard to work with, but
Absolutely.
As men, you just get called an asshole and you just shrug it off and you keep it pushing. Women, you guys are burdened with this other layer of somehow trying to coddle individuals, which is sexist, right? But have you made any mistakes in the past?
Have I made any
Documented
mistakes?
mistakes that if people pull your record, they will go, she flubbed this right here.
Not that I know of. You know what? I'm a hard worker. I have a strong work ethic, and I'm a perfectionist at heart. So I try not to make mistakes, especially when it comes to other people and their lives. And in criminal justice, that's what's important, right? I've spent my entire life doing my life's mission, and I have the passion for this work to make sure that we're getting it right for people, not only victims, but also people who are accused of crimes. And I think that's kind of what's missing, here in this equation and in this race, is talking about the practical aspects and the reality of running an agency in a county of 2.4 million people when you're dealing with people's lives every single day and the decisions that affect their freedoms, the decisions that affect keeping the public safe.
Is there anything that we missed that you're passionate about as far as change goes in Queens if you were to get this position?
The conviction review unit. Queens right now is the only county in this city that does not have a conviction review unit.
Conviction review unit? Didn't even know there was a such thing. Tell us more.
Can you break that down?
Sure. So conviction review unit is basically a unit that we designed in Brooklyn. I was the architect of it and helped Ken build it in Brooklyn.
Oh, I remember this.
And it is...
I did not know that was the name. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. And it is a unit that's designed to look at claims of wrongful convictions from the past.
Right.
A lot of them came out of the 80s and the 90s, right? When crime was at its highest and people were just trying to convict folks.
Right. I mean, we just saw the story of Central Park 5.
There you go.
Be brought up all over again.
There you go. So
and Ken was getting a lot of people out of jail and overturning a lot of cases from 25 years ago and 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So since 2014, when we built this unit in Brooklyn, we've exonerated and freed 26 wrongfully convicted people in Brooklyn. I personally worked on the case of David McCallum. He was a young man, 16 years old at the time, with his friend, another 16-year-old, William Stuckey. They got arrested for kidnapping, carjacking a guy in Queens, bringing him to Brooklyn and shooting him and killing him. That case was a travesty of justice. They had 2 videotape statements from each one of these 16-year-old kids, no defense counsel present, no parent present, after a long time of being in police custody, basically inculpating themselves, right? And their stories didn't even match up. So they went to trial. Both of them were found convicted. They went to prison for a very, very long time. The Reuben Hurricane Carter, the boxer, his last dying wish was to have us look at this case and exonerate William Stuckey and David McCallum. So I looked at it personally. We reopened the case. We found out that there was false testimony, botched evidence, and we exonerated David McCallum.
After how many years in prison?
About 26 years in prison.
Damn.
In fact, we're going to have a press conference with him today outside of the courthouse in Queens. So Queens does not have a conviction review unit, even on this campaign trail. I've been talking to folks who are saying to me, my loved one, my friend, was wrongfully convicted. When you become DA, will you look into this case? So
recently in Queens, the jogger that got murdered, the young lady, and her dad.
Oh, yes. What's her name? Her dad was a firefighter, I believe.
What is it?
Katrina Vetrano.
Yes.
Katrina.
Yeah.
So we sat and looked at that case and at least watched it. And the man that they have now convicted, people were saying that there was some problems with that case. Not only did the guy that they've convicted have some sort of mental health disorder, right? But they didn't want to do certain things, at least the judge didn't, to properly look at the case and the DNA and some other evidence. What is your view of that case?
So it's the Chanel Lewis case. And
Chanel Lewis, that's
yes,
his name. Got it.
Exactly. And so initially there was a hung jury back in November of 2018, and then he was retried this year, and he was found guilty. I think that is one of the cases that is definitely going to go up on appeal, if not requested to be looked at by the conviction review unit that I plan to build.
Now, the Petrano family, obviously a tremendous loss, right? So they want closure. And oftentimes families want closure at all costs because it helps them have some sort of vindication, whether it's done the right way or not, right? So I don't want to, obviously slander that family because they lost their little girl, right? But it does feel like some powers were at play with this case to get it concluded, and as much press coverage as it got, I was like, wow, people are really covering this case. Maybe it's because he's a former firefighter. Maybe the family has a lot of money. I don't know what kind of politics play into these cases. But it does feel like even when you look at, what's out now, when they see us, the public wants closure on these horrific cases and will do it and will accept it at all costs, especially when they see someone with a mental health disorder, somebody low income, and specifically black and brown males, right? Because I believe there's just a marketing campaign to always criminalize black men. It's an easy target, right? Because many of us are poor, and we don't have ways to defend ourselves financially, right? So our society has gotten accustomed to not asking that next question or not actually going and turning these cases upside down to see what actually happened. Would love to hear from you on Chanel Lewis specifically, but on the politics around a case like this.
Look, in this particular case, right? First of all, you're talking about Howard Beach. And given the
notoriously
history,
has racial issues.
Right, exactly. I mean, going back to the 80s,
That's right?
And so you're talking about a white woman who was sexually assaulted, murdered in Howard Beach, and then you have a black man on trial. So I think that, of course...
And a black man who's not mentally well.
And I think, of course, the media is going to, play into that, right? And follow that case judiciously. What troubles me about that case is that there was a dragnet that went on where they took DNA samples from over 300 black men. And now those DNA samples are on file, right? I don't believe that they were destroyed. So these folks are no longer suspects, obviously, right? But yet their DNA profile samples are on file. And so to me, that's an invasion of privacy, and that shouldn't be done. And why are we doing this to our young black men, keeping their DNA profiles on file with the government? We shouldn't be doing that at all.
Mm-hmm. Mina Malik is her name, district attorney for Queens. Rikers Island. What's the solution? Should it be closed?
Rikers Island is an absolute abomination. It is a violent place. I wouldn't want any family member of mine there. I wouldn't want any family member of yours in this room there. It is not fit for human beings, right? What I will say, though, is there is a move to community-based detention facilities.
We've talked to the mayor about this.
Right.
And this move, will keep people who need to be detained closer to their families, right? More connected to their families. I mean, not everybody is going to be, let out, let's say, right? You got some violent people who do some messed up stuff
Of course.
other people,
Yeah.
right? But I think what's important to note is that these new detention facilities need to follow the Nordic model of detention facilities. And what I mean by that is they don't look like cages. They don't look like jails. They don't look like prisons. They look like dormitory-style rooms which facilitate re-entry from the moment someone goes in there. It is a humane place. There's interaction amongst the staff, amongst the guards, as well as the people who are being detained. And people are treated like human beings, right? They're not treated like animals. And right now, I think that's what's wrong with our system, is that a lot of people are being treated like animals. So how are you going to rehabilitate somebody? And how are you going to reform somebody when you're treating them like less than a human being?
And so, I mean, part of the conversation we had with your opponent, Cabán, up here was the amount of inventory, right? Because when you do the local borough detention facilities, there's a potential that you've created more inventory, right? And by inventory, I mean cells and the capacity to hold individuals than you have when you have Rikers. And when you have empty spaces, it's funny. It's kind of like at your house when you have empty spaces. People look to fill them. I need to put a painting on that wall. I need to put a human in this cell.
And also, what happens to all the current administration that's there? You know what I mean? It's like
People want those jobs.
Right. People are just going to
Those
lose their
pensions.
jobs? Or how? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, and how do you differentiate between the corrupt ones and the ones that are not? Like,
That's a great question, Laura. And I think that's where accountability comes in again, right? So we're not only talking about police accountability, we're also talking about accountability for corrections officers. Because sometimes some corrections officers should not be on the job because of the way they treat people and the way that they interact with them and the way that assaultive behavior becomes the norm.
And also because they've been probably on the job very, very long and have co-opted behavior because of the trauma of basically going to work in a very violent, emotionally traumatizing job. And that's a shout to the people who do that work. But it affects you over a long period of time, and you lose your sensitivity and your ability to be humane.
Absolutely. And this question has come up so much during the course of this campaign that I took it upon myself to host a panel at the Queens Museum with Public Square Media. They just came out with like a mini documentary called Justice by Design. I encourage everyone to check it out, which shows and depicts what a detention facility could look like, right? Where you're not treating people like animals, but you're really encouraging them to reintegrate into society and you're addressing their underlying needs, whether it's mental health, substance use disorder, or whatever treatment and services that they need. And shout out to Deputy Commissioner Louis Molina from Westchester County Department of Corrections because he's following this model up there and he's actually implementing these important changes in the detention facility that he oversees.
Mina Malik, it's June 25th. June 25th.
Yeah, it's coming up.
If you are a registered voter in Queens, you could get out here and vote. How many, a lot of these, when Ocasio-Cortez came up and was running for her district, it was an awakening for us to see, these offices, these jobs can be won by, 10 votes, right? It's a very small population of individuals that can get someone like yourself into this position and make these changes.
Absolutely. And it is the majority vote, basically, for this election, this primary.
It's no politics. There's no electoral. Right. It's, the one that gets the most votes wins.
That's right. But it is a very important position. We expect a low turnout because it's an off-cycle year. But this is an extremely important election. There hasn't been a competitive race for this seat since 1977, 42 years ago.
Wow.
And so if we want to implement meaningful change with somebody who actually knows what they're doing, people need to come out and vote on June 25th. And I'm asking for the public support. I'm asking for their vote in this election because we can't afford to get this wrong. This job is too serious. It's not a job for a politician. It's not a job for someone who's term limited out of office. And it's not a job for somebody who's a novice and who's going to learn as they go when they take the seat on day one and be relying on other people to make decisions.
Were you taking shots at any of your opponents when you listed any of those things? I felt like it was shade, right? I felt like it was shade.
I'm just trying to do what's right by the people of Queens County.
No, I understand. But I also would like to point out to individuals, there's been 2 candidates for this job that have come up here. And this is very important. Because I obviously am biased because I feel like if you come to Hot 97 in New York City, you're coming to speak to a specific audience, right? And you care about that audience, which is, for us, is predominantly black, brown, and 18 to 49 years old, right? And probably even more narrow, like 26 to 40, right? And you and Cabán have come. You said there's 2 other people running.
There's actually 7 of us all together.
So if we haven't seen y'all, that means you don't actually care about us.
There you go.
Because you haven't come to talk to us and care about this vote. Which also, if you're a district attorney, most of the cases that you're seeing in that role are black and brown men.
That's right.
Which if you didn't come to speak to black and brown men
says a lot.
And their mothers and sisters and families, then you don't care about their livelihoods and the things that are interesting to them.
Absolutely. And I will point out one more thing. The leadership in the Queens DA's office, despite the fact that Queens County is the most diverse county in the country, if not the world, is not representative of the communities that it serves. And as district attorney, that's what I'm going to change, because we have to have people at the table where those important policy decisions are being made that affect our youth and our black and brown communities who represent and who come from the community. You can't just have folks up there, having a paternalistic attitude and saying, I know what's best for you.
Paternalistic. So she was taking a shot at too many dudes. There's too many dudes up there. Who else?
No, but you make perfect sense.
And it's not just about diversity, right? It's also about inclusion. Because diversity is being asked to the ball, inclusion is actually being asked to dance.
That's right.
And that's what we need to do.
Mina Malik, give it up for a one-time Queens DA. Go out and vote June 25th.